Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to wrap up this week as usual. We do on Saturdays. We check out an entire album, track by track, exploring what each song does in isolation and how it fits into the larger artwork. Today we're going to be looking at the band Harakiri for the Sky. They sound familiar to me. I went and looked. We've never done a reaction to them, and as far as I can tell, we've never done a reaction to them on a live stream either, but it's still a band name that I feel familiar with for some reason. I don't know. We have some interesting album art here. The font for the band name, the nature-based album art, the name Harakiri for the Sky. I'm kind of expecting something core related. Maybe post-hardcore. Maybe metalcore. Also maybe indie rock too. It feels a little abrasive for indie rock visually, but Harakiri for the Sky kind of has like an indie rock vibe to it too. So, I don't know. Let's just dive into this one. It is 75 minutes long across 8 tracks. Every song is at least 8.5 minutes long. We probably will not be combining tracks at all. We'll take a break to analyze the music after each song. So, let's dive into this first one. It is the longest, the only double digit, sitting at 11.5 minutes, Calling the Rain. The album just starts like that. No soft fade in, no moment of silence. The second one is this first guitar hit. Okay. That's a nice harmony right there. So we have this constant eighth note, da, 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 broken up into groups of 3 and 2, 1, 2, 3, or 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Of course, this section isn't doing that. The last one was though. This is playing it more straight. Yeah, the only accent we get is at the beginning of the chord change on the guitars. The drums, they're just accenting all the time. Interesting though, Calling the Rain, this definitely seems like background music in a film where somebody just like arms out, rain pouring down on them, a sense of relief after a tense moment. It carries a lot of weight and moodiness to it. Black metal? a lot of compression on this, but it's still clear. Even the vocals, I can make out phrases here and there. A very abrupt stop, and then this cleaner guitar comes in immediately, and it kind of felt like a bouncy decay, but it was actually just the new line coming in. So they didn't do it this time, but I appreciate the electric guitar coming in big, and then the drums following that up rather than the guitar. I thought that was pretty nice. Interesting, without all of the 16th note guitars, this feels, well, now we have a 16th note guitar coming in, but it felt very open, like there was plenty of room, very spacious. We're beginning to fill those spaces in. Ooh, there's a counter guitar in there? Yeah, there's a moving riff. Cyclical, but acts as a sort of call and response to that linear guitar that sat above everything. there's our patterns in the beginning again, focusing on the threes. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's given us a dotted quarter idea, which is 1.5 beats per note. Another really hard stop to bring in a clean electric again. Just beautiful guitar layering though. 2 moving parts. I thought it was a violin, but 16th note picking guitar again. All right. You know, if the whole album's that, I might enjoy myself today. Not to say that I don't always enjoy myself on some level when it comes to these albums. I usually find something to learn from it, or I'm taking on some journey or some story. There's always some joy I find in it. Not always. Of course, there are some albums that just completely beat me down, but you know, generally speaking, I have fun with these. This one, though, it's very interesting. I wasn't too far off, I think, with the post-hardcore angle. It's it's not post-hardcore. There's harmonic elements, though, that do remind me of that. But there's also some, I don't know, heavy metal harmonies going on in here. Of course, it's got a very blackened tone overall. There's a lot of just rigid 16th note playing in here. The vocals are sort of pushed up a bit. They're a bit nasalier for harshes. They remind me of black metal harshes, but with a little bit more body to them. And that's I mean, that's actually a pretty good description of this, is that it feels like black metal, but there's just enough differences along the way that it's a blackened kind of something else, and the something else seems to vary from minute to minute. There's parts of this song that I feel are more metallic. There's parts of this song that I feel are more melodic. And there's parts of this that I feel are closer to the texture playing of like post-hardcore ballads. So I don't know how to describe it yet, other than, hey, this is Harakiri for the Sky. I can't say I've heard anything like this. We've listened to some fresh, new, I guess experimental, progressive would probably be the right word for it, black metal. For some reason, no bands are coming to mind. I can picture music videos and band members. I can't picture the names of these bands, though. But in the past, year. Actually, 2024 I think was a pretty good year for y'all, showing me where black metal has gone more recently. There's some cool stuff happening in the scene. I'll say that. I don't know where this sits though. It's definitely a different take on black metal, and it's working for me on a lot of levels, actually. The first being harmonically. Black metal, traditionally, especially your third wave stuff that kind of found its sound, has a very metallic feeling to it. It goes for a bit more moodiness often, but I find that it's not a very interesting sound as far as note choices, chord choices, that kind of thing. It's not a very interesting sound to me. If I want something that's moody and darker, there's other genres that I think work for me that capture that vibe in an aesthetic that works for my ears. Black metal just consistently, it doesn't grab me on the emotional level, and a lot of that comes down to the chords and the note choices and the intervals at play. Here, we have a song that I find to be very emotionally expressive. It is still moody, sure. It's got a depressive element to it, but it mixes it with optimism. Too many of the notes are in a higher octave. Even the instrument tones tend to be a bit brighter and chirpier at times. It still has its fair share of lower tones, but it doesn't go for those ultra low, meaty guitar tones. We do have some lower based chord guitar work in here. It still has largeness and punch, but it's not going for that ultra low sound. It's not focused too much on the low end. If anything, I'd actually say that this song balances more towards a mid to treble sound, despite being metal, which tends to favor, especially modern metal, tends to favor the low end. I find that to be interesting. It's not what I would call perfectly balanced in like an equal representation of bass versus treble, but it is a balanced sound overall. It never feels like it teeters too far into a trebly side, even though it does tend to favor notes in the higher registers. Um, so that's an interesting thing going on right there, but it absolutely works for my ears. And one of the nice things about treble, higher pitched tones, they tend to take up less space. They tend to sound less muddy. There's clarity, and probably due to some science about wavelengths, I find that uh, they tend to feel a bit thinner. They take up less space. You can put more things in them. And Harakiri for this guy absolutely does. When I say put more, you can put more things into a song because they're taking up less space. That's what I meant. Harakiri for this guy absolutely goes in this direction, though. There are multiple places in here where we have three, maybe even four guitar ideas. Usually one of them is a bit on the lower area, creating some sort of foundation. I'm sure the bass guitar is alongside there as well. Working with lower tones, wider stacks of tones. We're talking about, chords down here rather than moving ideas, and usually slower moving where we just have a chord and we'll play it for a full bar, and at the next bar we will start a new chord. Less movement, more about filling space, more about setting a tone and an emotion and an atmosphere. But then we'll have 2 to 3 different moving guitar ideas on top of that. And it's gorgeous. I mean, the ideas themselves work really well together, but just to hear so many instruments at one time in something that to my ears I want to classify as black metal or blackened adjacent is awesome. You know, I don't know if this was the intentions of the person who requested it, but I've rejected a lot of black metal over the years. I don't know if it's something that people just like seeing me do is be tortured by black metal, or if y'all just really enjoy the insight and the torture is just a side product. It's just a process to get all this cool information about the music. But we've listened to a lot of black metal, and a lot of it has bounced off of me. And this could be someone's attempt to get me to enjoy something Blackened. And if the rest of the album's like this, I might be on board with it. In fact, based on just this one song, I do want to check out more from them. Oh snap! They have an album that came out 4 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, January 24th. Huh. It is also, well, this one's only 67 minutes, but it is also only 8 songs. Okay, if I enjoy this, I have some homework to do. They have quite a few albums though. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We still have a lot of music ahead of us though. There's a chance for them to start not working for me. I was going to say disappoint me. It's not a great way to describe it, but it could be what happens because we're off to a great start. But yeah, just harmonically, it's not black metal. It's sort of all over the place. There's some sections in here that, like I mentioned, feel a bit more metally than others. But I think it's a nice mix of a lot of different sounds, a lot of different styles of writing, and ultimately, I never found any of them to overstay their welcome, despite the fact that we stick into ideas for a pretty long time. For an 11-minute song, I'd say there were probably 7 sections in here, which averages each section at just over a minute. It doesn't feel like you're like, oh, gee, it's only a 1 minute section. That's not very long. But in some of these sections, it can feel a bit longer, and that's more of an average too. Some of the sections lasted shorter in order to make room for other sections to more fully explore what they're doing. But that's one of the ways that it kind of deviates for me. But then there's the production, and I kind of talked about this a little bit. There's a clarity to this. I mentioned during the reaction, I can hear phrases from the vocalist. It's not consistent. Some of it, I think, is just the mixing of it all. Sometimes the guitars do overpower the vocals, not in a way that I think that the mixing is bad, just in a way that there's usually on the low end guitars a bit of muddiness because the vocals are also these low growls, and it sort of overlaps a little bit. But any time that there is a clear space for the vocals to be present in, yeah, I can pick up words here and there. That's just not something I see too often in black metal, even though I think I should. The more I listen to black metal vocals, I'm like, I should be able to understand what's going on in these. But black metal productions, especially once you start looking at the mid to lo-fi stuff, it's that's I think is where the hurdle gets in. I will say that in general, black metal vocals tend to be more clear than like death metal growls, so I'll give them that credit at least. But here I feel like it's taken up another notch, and there's a lot of clarity to the physical production of these harsh vocals, the enunciation of the words, and the production allows a lot of clarity too. I feel like there isn't, two separate recordings going on in order to make the sound wider and then reverb put on top of that again in order to make the harsh sound larger. There is a lot of power behind this harsh, but it also, you can hear individual cracks of the compression, that fry crackle stuff that you can make. Yeah, I can hear individual pops and cracks in the vocal delivery too, which is it's led me to think that it's probably a single layer recording, just one take rather than overlapping takes. And like I said, it's a bit thinner. There is a harshness to it, but the harshness isn't everything in the tone of the delivery. It feels like somebody just got in front of a microphone and did a harsh vocal rather than having to do that multiple times and then overproducing it so that it can feel big and large. Now, granted, I'm not saying that all the time that you hear a really large harsh is production tricks. There are certainly some beasts of vocalists out there. But I think in most cases, when I think about a vocal like this, that's a bit nasally or that's pushed up to the upper palate a bit more, they tend to come across a bit more narrow. This one does. It has a little bit of power to it, but it's still a bit of a narrow sound. And I love that it's just kind of left to be. This is just how he sounds as a vocalist. This is his harsh. Just let it be. Don't try to clean it up. Don't try to process it. This is human. And through that, I can hear a lot of clarity in not just the words, but also the technique too, the unique characteristics of his harsh. I love all that. Again, it's a production thing going on, but it's also choices in here that feel very high fidelity. Not pushing towards overproduction, but just a strong amount of clarity in every part of the song. The last thing is a bit of a stickler I have for black metal is a rigidity of sound, usually of rhythm, just constant 16th notes all the time. Again, I'm not trying to paint this huge picture on all of black metal, but specifically that stereotypical black metal, particularly stuff that comes out of the third wave and things influenced by that third wave movement of black metal, just constant 16th notes all the time. It bores me. This is the opposite of that. Do we have 16th note stuff in here? Sure. Bass kick does it every once in a while. There's quite a few guitar parts that do it, sometimes as foundation, sometimes as texture. That's pretty neat right there. In fact, that one part where I pointed out that there was no 16th note guitar part, and it felt very open and spacious. A higher pitched one, probably on the highest string of the guitar, came in. I think it was on the left side, kind of pushed back into the mix though. It created this nice texture in the section rather than trying to draw attention to it, rather than it being the main riff. It was just this sound that existed on the background, this repeated attack going on. That worked really well. I love that. Very cool ideas there. Like I said, the bass kick, though, we get that every once in a while, but the drummer isn't just focused on 16th notes all the time. We did see a rigidity of 8th notes at the beginning of the song, and there certainly are plenty of sections in here that focus on constant 8th or 16th notes. But I feel like it's always tastefully balanced out with things that don't go in that direction. Partially is because even when we go in that direction, we do have rhythmic differences. As I mentioned, one of the main rhythmic cadences in here is the 3-3-3-3-2-2. 1-2-3, 1-2-3, 1-2-3, 1-2-3, 1-2-3, 4, 1-2-3. That shows up everywhere in this track. And basically what that creates is 4 dotted quarter notes followed by usually 2 quarter notes is how I feel that. But sometimes it would just be a half note. It creates a bit of rhythmic syncopation in the song because we have groupings of 3 rather than groupings of 2, 4, or 8, which is what shows up everywhere else, especially at the very beginning when I tried to show that, and then the guitars came in with the constant 16th notes, only accenting the first hit of the chord change. Yeah, we shifted off to one accent every bar, and very different feel than this 3-3-3-3-4, which creates this minor syncopation. But also because we're looking at those threes being 1.5 beat long, it pushes against the drums anytime that they play an accent on 1 and 3. That's doing an accent every 2 beats. The guitars are doing an accent every 1.5 beats, and that leads them to stay in sync and then get out of sync and then come back into sync and then get out of sync and get back into sync, and that creates a really cool syncopated groove to go in here. If you listen to any of these instruments individually, you're not going to find a lot of syncopation in here. But when you listen to the entire group combined, in moments like this, you'll find a rhythmic syncopation that adds an interesting rhythmic texture to the song. It does so not by creating something groovy, not by having an instrument dance around and play different note lengths. It's still very Blackened in the sense that they're fond of rigid phrasings. They just layer these up so we get polyrhythmic ideas in a sense, and that's going to create syncopation out of a bunch of rigid ideas. And I like that. It retains the heart of that stereotypical black metal sound while exploring different ways of incorporating rhythmic ideas into this sound. And it feels both progressive and in ways and very traditional in others. It's a good way of walking that line right down the middle and being exploratory in your craft while still being influenced by the past. And for me, at least, also on top of everything else, it's black metal with a twist. It's finding that middle ground. It's anytime we get to these extreme metals, doom, death, black metal, I have a hard time getting into them. You got to meet me on my own ground somewhere, right? We got to meet in the middle. I need an olive branch extended to me. And this is a way to do that. This is a way to get me into a more extreme style of metal, is to incorporate some of these moments into it, and sort of find a way to be traditional and progressive simultaneously. Now, this last one I think I'm going to ruffle some feathers with if I haven't already. This has a lot of melody to it. Now, black metal has a lot of melody too. Black metal is usually built up of a lot of riffs. I know there can be more chordal based black metal, and I know there's probably a melodic black metal genre tag, but just looking at black metal in general, it's got riffs. Riffs can be melodic. And there's melody in black metal. But this one, I feel that it's just more of a core element, and it's not hidden behind any texture. It's not hidden behind constant 16th notes. I mean, we do hear that sometimes here too, but there's so many places where these moving guitar parts will come in and have these. I think they're still cyclical. They're still an ostinato or a riff, but they just feel like there's a larger focus on the melodic quality of it. What kind of like varying attack styles. Do I accent this one or that note or this other note in the run? And it's very much focused on creating these beautiful semi-harmonic ideas too, almost as if they're holding out a chord in their left hand and then plucking the strings in a more melodic way, where as all the strings ring out, sure, you're going to hear the chord, you're going to hear all these notes together, but also you get the moving idea here. And these usually are constant eighth notes too, so we have that rhythmic rigidity built in as well. But because of the differing harmonic ideas that we've heard on this song that kind of deviate from that standard metallic sounds, and then we're also pairing it with more of this, it almost sounds like math rock finger picking stuff, as far as the harmonies go. It just puts a very different twist on the whole formula, and once again gives me a bridge to get into a Blackened style with, to get into these more rigid rhythmic ideas that typically bounce off of me, because I get to hear all these other components to it. And in this case, it's not always just one guitar playing these more moving ideas, it's two. Usually one on either side, complementing each other, ornamenting around each other. It's just beautiful. And that's not usually a word I use for anything Blackened. But it is. I find so many moments of this beautiful. Granted, they are usually when we kick off the distortion and go into that clean guitar tone, but it's still there. And it's not just one part. It's not like, oh, we wrote a beautiful intro and then we had, the next 9 minutes was gnarly. No, they kept coming back to it. I appreciate that. It makes it more of a core part of the experience of the song, rather than relegating it to a specific role of the album, like transitions or intros or outros. And so, despite the fact that there's elements in here that aren't really my cup of tea, I think generally speaking, this song worked for me. There's a rigidity to rhythm in here. There's the monotony of the harshes in here. The dude really only has one harsh style. It has a little bit of variance to it, but it's generally the same thing from start to finish. These are elements that aren't necessarily going to work for me. The constant bass kick at times is fine, but because it's all contrasted against the opposite of more beautiful sections based on moving and layered ideas of syncopated rhythms, it all blends together really well. Is it something I'd search for, go out of my way to listen to? I don't know yet. I am kind of queuing up their latest album to see what they're doing today. But I think if I had heard this in the wild, I probably would have thought, that's pretty interesting, and then ended up passing on it because there's still a lot of stuff in it that I don't like. But there's still a lot of stuff in it that I do like. And it does make me a little bit intrigued to continue on. The last thing I want to bring up here is emotion. And I think this is really what locks me in. If I didn't connect with the song emotionally, this would definitely be more of a pass for me. Something that I might vaguely be interested in just to see what they're going to do, how they're exploring the sound, but not something that I think I actively engaged with. There's a heavy weight to this, but it's paired with brighter tones and sometimes paired with brighter melodies. The more moving ideas gives the song a bit of energy. And when I say moving ideas, I mean when we have maybe constant 8th or 16th notes and every note is a different pitch. Because sometimes, a guitar will play 16 note or 16th notes, which is 16 notes per bar, and then just stay on one chord and just change every 16, right? So while that might feel driving to a lot of people, how I tend to hear that is just a whole note, which is something that takes up 4 bars. I just hear it as one long held out note. I don't really hear all the movement. I don't hear the texture. I don't hear the constant picking. I just hear a tone being held out. No different than a violin just, constantly bowing the same tone. So while there is energy technically in the rhythmic element there, playing 16 times per bar is a lot, the energy I get out of that section actually is pretty low. And that's my thing with a lot of black metal. Because of that, I think I hear it very differently than black metal fans do. For that reason right there. But with this song, there's many parts where each hit is changing pitch, which makes it feel more moving. It feels more energetic. It doesn't feel as stagnant. This makes the song feel like it has forward momentum, like it wants to go somewhere. And the weight of the emotion, the harmony, pulls it down. And it's this push and pull, a want to proceed in life and a necessity to stay here, finding it difficult to take that next step. The brighter tones in here, the sometimes maybe optimistic melody lines, also run juxtaposed to the heavier parts of this. And it just feels very emotionally complex. It's somebody who wants to run, maybe not necessarily away, but they want to go somewhere, and they can't. They're bogged down by something. There's a weight, a heaviness, a darkness, maybe even present, some sort of melancholy, an optimism, a hope through that, but still, it doesn't get rid of the weight. It just shares the space with it, kind of even creating more weight through it. I don't exactly have a strong read on this song structurally. There's a lot going on in here. I don't have a strong read of it emotionally. Once again, it's rather complex. There's depth to it. But I know I'm drawn to it like a good story. This is a fantastic intro to a film, so to speak, where maybe like a good thriller, you're not quite sure what's going on, but you need some answers and you're going to stick around for them. That's where I'm at with this album so far. There's a lot of neat ideas going on. I'm hooked by the narrative of the emotions. I want to know how all of this works out, how it resolves, what it's building to. And honestly, I'd stick around just for those dual guitar parts. They're just absolutely gorgeous every time they pop up. 40 minutes in already, jeez. Let's dive into some lyrics on Calling the Rain, and then we'll push forward to the next track. Okay, that's a way to start an album. I don't know if I was mishearing things, maybe it's just the general timbre of the instruments. I'm going to be paying a lot more attention towards the emotional weight of some of these decisions. I heard hope and optimism in the song, drowned out, played alongside this heavy, melancholic weight. Yeah, but like, there's nothing in the lyrics about hope or optimism. It's just depression from start to finish. Uh, verse 1. Everything written is very direct. Jeez, give me a second. Everything written is very direct. The language is straightforward. There is a chorus. It pops up every once in a while. But honestly, it feels more like a series of linear ideas, one just leading to the next. It reads less like poetry and more like a diary. It says, since the death they called me, and I heard you passed away. Since the day they called me, and I heard you passed away, I had no peaceful night, no minute of rest. I can't hear myself think. No love left for another. The first night of winter was unison, my own death. Come closer, dearest void, and choke me from the inside. Strangle me slowly or break my neck whilst the fall. It makes no difference to me. I don't care at all. Neglect the fall as long as we keep on falling apart. So he got a phone call. Someone he knew passed away. And since then, all he has done is invite death into his life. He says, choke me out from the inside or break my neck. It doesn't matter to me. The pain that this person feels. And there's no eloquence to the language either. In fact, I'd even say that some of this doesn't make a lot of grammatical sense. There's a couple specific phrases in here. I'm like, I get the gist of it, but I don't know. I think that's the wrong word you would put in there, but it doesn't matter. Perfection doesn't matter anymore. Nothing matters. There's no attempt to rhyme any of this. There's no strong element of cadence to this. It's just free poetry, spoken word almost. Like I said, it reads more like a journal more than poetry, more than lyrics. It's just somebody in pain writing their thoughts out. The chorus says, you are not my closest friend, but the longest serving. But you died last winter, strung up in the stable. They found you in the morning, dead as our dreams. Tonight I'll get so terribly drunk I'll lapse into a coma. I'll drink myself into oblivion because the only way to forget about you is to deafen all the senses until deadness eventuates. I don't know if eventuates is a word, but it's one of those things where you hear it and you're like, yeah, I get what that means, even if it's not right. It's definitely a cromulent word. But the idea here is just that he's so upset about this. He gets a phone call that his friend had committed suicide. He hung himself in the stable, and all he can do is drink until he goes into a coma, until he's in whatever, just deafening, silencing all of his senses. It's the only thing that can make him feel any sort of improvement to get out of this depression. But I like that fourth line in the chorus, they found you dead as our dreams. I think that says a lot about not necessarily the person themselves, although a little bit of that too, but the circumstances of their life, how things played out. Verse 3 states that he might attempt suicide himself now. He said, chance had thrown us together, and only death can take us apart. If my attempt shall not fail, a bullet will all too soon conclude. Verse 4 talks about using drugs and alcohol to fill the hole in his heart, and that, once again, he only has one breath left until the void engulfs him, and hopefully that breath will belong to the past. So hopefully, as someone's reading this, he'll already have taken his own life. Yeah, that's a heavy track. And while I caught heaviness in the music, I think it's difficult to avoid that. There's a strong weight that appears in most of this song and a melancholic haze that permeates every part of it. I honestly didn't get something this heavy from it. And like I said, there's no optimism here at all. This is just pain. This is pure depression. Looking at the rest of the titles, Bury Me, The Traces We Leave, This Life as a Dagger, Thanatos, Funeral Dreams. I'm thinking this is going to be the way it is. Death hovers around all of these titles. Let's push forward, I suppose. Funeral Dreams. Oh, the album's also called Trauma, so there's that too. Let's dive in, see what's going on. That's the second time we've had that breaking up of ideas. I was just thinking about how I would probably add a violin and cello around this, and we get some bells. Yeah, great idea. That's the first time we've heard the alternating bass and snare at this speed, right? Because I think this is the first time I've really thought, oh yeah, this is black metal. Not like Blackened adjacent. This is just black metal. having the slides in there is an interesting. Yeah, that line's still in the mix. In a section like this, it feels more optimistic. The piano is really helping lean into that as well. The cymbals being so clear on the outside is a very cool sound. Sitting just on the outskirts of the guitars, feeling like a wall for the sound to reside within, like the outskirts of the sound sphere. Such a post-hardcore chord to end on. slightly optimistic due to the presence of that higher tone in there that has a bit of resolution to it, but a lack of resolution in the middle of the chord, which gives it this mixed feeling of both being the ending and not. Alright, this was an interesting follow-up. A lot of the things I praised Calling the Rain for, they're kind of not here. I loved all of the clean electric layering that we had for Calling the Rain, and how the song was frequently dipping its toes back into that more layering smaller ideas rather than putting a bunch of heavy ideas together for a wall of sound. I thought it balanced those two rather well. Funeral Dreams leans primarily into layering large sounds in order to create a wall of sound. There are still plenty of layers. I mean, even in those final 2.5 minutes or so, in the biggest parts of the song, if you listen, you can still hear some ideas. You have your 16th note chords going on with guitars pushed out to either side, sort of sitting at the periphery of everything. As you come inside, there is a moving idea of sorts. There's one off on the left that's constant eighth notes, and it kind of has a home note that it returns to, and like every 3 or 4 hits it'll go up to a different note, return home, do 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 down, do 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 down, do 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 down, something along those lines. That's not the exact riff at all. I'm just kind of giving an idea, because honestly I couldn't hear the riff. I could hear when we hit these other notes, and I could hear a constant moving. So I don't really know what those notes were, and I have to assume that there's a pedal tone involved if there's constant movement but not constant new notes coming out. There's also, I think, a guitar that just exists somewhere in here that is just white noise. I don't know if it's playing chords and I'm only picking up on like the production of it, the guitar tone being very distorted, lots of overdrive. I don't know. I just hear a lot of white noise at times, and it's not coming from any of these guitars, I don't think, where their tone, the pitches they're playing, is more clear. There is also a lead guitar idea that is existing on top of all this. The bass is playing pedal tone stuff, and the drums are just constant all the time. There's a lot of parts going on. You really have to listen for a lot of that, though. There was a point, I guess we were about 6.5 minutes into the song, and I was like, let me just feel it, right? Let me stop actively searching out individual ideas. Let me just see what the song feels like. And like with a lot of black metal, I had a real tough time getting past just the weight of it all. Post metal, too. Whenever you have a lot of ideas all stacked on top of each other, they're all big, and it just creates this big weightiness. That wall of white noise, of production, of compression, of distortion, of overdrive, it dominates the feeling. It just feels big. I still get a positivity out of it in general because of the notes being played, but I can't really hear any of that unless I specifically aim for it, aside from that lead guitar. That lead guitar is very clear in the mix, and it has a syncopated rhythm to it, and yeah, it's easy to pick that out. But everything else just kind of molds together into a whole, which is the opposite of Calling the Rain. I really loved the individuality of that track, where everything could be heard and understood on its own, where everything was obviously complementing each other, but still doing their own thing. This is a straightforward black metal track, as far as I'm concerned. There's a nice melody that sits on top of it all at times, but, well, and harmonically it's quite a bit different. The notes chosen, once again, don't really go for that heavy sound that black metal tends to go for. It doesn't go for the Baroque thing either. Black metal likes to pull Baroque classical stuff out into their writing too at times. That's not present here either. Again, this feels more, honestly, like a post-hardcore ballad, maybe even a little Midwest emo at times. It's really interesting where the note choices come from, because they're not really metallic at all half the time. And I'm still having a hard time to place it, because it feels strange in this context of, obviously they're playing black metal, just The notes aren't what I would expect for the genre. But I think that's the most interesting thing about it. It is the one thing that allows me to get into it a little bit more, but it's also the thing that makes things a bit confusing for me. Unlike Calling the Rain, which I felt was rather melancholic, this one wasn't. Sure, there's a little bit of darkness to it. I'm not going to say that this is some bubblegum pop, bright, sugary stuff, but it's also generally positive and hopeful. The song's called Funeral Dreams. I'm not thinking the lyrics are going to go in that direction much at all. There's a part of me that thinks I should be interpreting this in a bittersweet idea. That the little bit of darkness in there is supposed to balance out the positivity and optimism. But as we saw in Calling the Rain, at least lyrically, there's nothing to balance there. And again, I'm thinking with a song called Funeral Dreams, I'm not supposed to find that balance either. We'll get into this later once we hit the lyrics and we can better see how they fit what's going on in the music, but I just wanted to point that out right here. I don't really feel a lot of negativity in here, enough to color it, sure, but not enough for me to feel sad while listening to the music. Overwhelmed? Sure. Massive weight on my shoulders? 100%. The black metal wall of sound stuff does that. Harmonically, though, I'm told a very different story. Speaking about that wall of sounds, very heavily led by the drums this time around. As I mentioned, Calling the Rain, we got a lot of 8th and 16th note playing, rigid rhythms from the guitar work. We saw more of that on here, too. The guitars layering on top of each other creates density, sure, but there's also more melodic ideas coming out of that and more textural ones, so the harmonic elements don't really get stacked up as heavily as they would in more traditional black metal or even post-metal. Instead, I feel like the drums really push this one forward, and I think it also defines this song for me. As I mentioned when the alternating bass and snare came in, I thought, oh, is this the first time we've heard it? Because to me, this is the first part of the album where I'm definitively thinking this is black metal. Harmonically, yeah, not really what I would expect. Again, but rhythmically, this is what I expect. What the drums are doing, this is what I expect. We had blast beats before that. We've had 16th note bass kicks. Definitely a lot of things that feel blackened, but the drums here, this was black metal drumming, pretty much from start to finish. Even a lot of the more flourishy cymbal work that I pointed to and praised for Calling the Rain isn't really here. This is a more aggressive track all over the place for the drums. We do have a couple of places where we get a little bit of syncopation, a little bit of lightening up, but for the most part, the drummer is just all in on aggression, on weight, on smashing as many parts of the drum kit as he can in the shortest amount of time he can. And to me, it comes off as a less dynamic song than Calling the Rain because of all of this. It's emotionally less dynamic, it's rhythmically less dynamic, it's layered less dynamic, and the structure feels less dynamic too. Where Calling the Rain felt like 7, 8, 9 sections to me, this one felt like 3 or 4. And I know part of that is that it's a shorter track, sure, but it's not that much shorter, 2.5 minutes. It just feels like it explores the same things over and over, where Calling the Rain was more like a story. This just feels like a black metal track with a different harmonic element to it. It did make me wish we could have had more of those clean electric parts from Calling the Rain, but I also understand contrast too. Not just within a song, but within an album. Albums should have ebbs and flows. They should tell a story just like a song should. While we are looking at 8 individual tracks, it's also easy to see them as 8 individual chapters who need to work well together to tell the story of the album. Maybe we really needed a more aggressive track here. I think all that I want to accomplish with this section here and bringing it up is just to place my hopes out so that everyone can know what they are. I don't mind having a little bit of variety on the album, sure, but I would certainly like to return back to the sound of Calling the Rain more than one more time on this album. And part of me is afraid that we won't, and that's going to be the standout track for me that sets the bar ridiculously high at the beginning of the album and nothing else meets it. I don't know if that's how it's going to be, but I also ran into this last week, was it? Or the week before? I don't remember what it was. The first track blew me away, and oh, it was Hungry Lights, the Araya Ascent. Solid album. Honestly, if it didn't have that first track, I think I would have been a lot more receptive to it, but the bar was set really high for me to begin with, and it never really met that again. Kind of felt like a letdown through the rest. I would have a very different opinion of it now that I understand what the album's actually trying to do and what its core goals are, but it doesn't help in the first time. And if that happens here too, the fact that it's also black metal, I mean, it's going to compound on itself. I'm not going to have a good time. But I'll try to keep this in mind and course correct as needed, understanding where my biases lie and trying to work around them. As I try to do, it's just easier to do when I understand what's happening. Anything else for this one? I don't think so. I touched on everything I wanted to touch on. Yeah, lyrics. Not just death that's shared among all of the titles here, or most of them. I wonder if all of this is going to be about his friend's suicide. This song seems to follow up on the last track rather well. He seems to be reminiscing about old times, wondering about where the future leads from here, even talking a little bit about how this town would kill him too if he had stuck around. So some guys just give up living. They start dying little by little, piece by piece, burying their hopes beneath disrooted trees. Most of them just die a wretched death near these streets. Says, I can already hear the chains clattering behind my ears. I can feel the flames searing all last evidence. That we lost this battle doesn't mean we've lost the war, but only when we've lost everything will we be free to leave. I think that's an interesting stanza right there. Part of it, feeling the flame that sears all the last evidence. I mean, is it evidence of the life that was lived? I don't know. Possibly. Knowing that memory fades over time. There's probably a lot less that he remembers of this person already. He had to be called out of town. He had to drive back to his hometown to grieve. Maybe they weren't that close of friends anymore. Maybe they were at one time. The chorus does say that we shared the thirst of swans in the summer, and we shared alignment. The city will be the death of me. To be homebound will be the death of me. So it seems like once upon a time, they were best of buds. And he ended up moving out of the city, of the state, of the country, whatever. He left to pursue other things. And his buddy stayed back. And he says, if I'd stayed back too, the city would have taken my life from me. I would have lost things little by little until it was all I could do as well. But maybe he's already started to lose some memories, as time does, especially of things that we don't think about. But then it says, just because we've lost the battle doesn't mean we've lost the war, which is usually a rallying cry, right? We might have failed yesterday, but we haven't failed overall. There's still progress to go. There's still time to get up on the horse and finish the race. He says, but only when we've lost everything will we be free to leave. Talking about freedom there. It's an interesting Inversion. I believe that sentence basically says when we have nothing left to live for, we can leave this realm, this plane of existence. But it comes after speaking about losing wars and losing battles. Something that, as I said, is usually used a bit more positively. I like the bridge. It says, I can never regret, but I can feel sorrow. At least it's not the same thing. I don't regret our time together. I don't regret knowing you. I don't regret building these memories. As much pain that I'm in right now, it's what I would prefer to be feeling. I can feel this sorrow. It justifies your existence when you were here. That's powerful. And that's it. We have 4 verses and then a chorus, bridge, chorus, which is an interesting inversion on the standard structure. Instead of going verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, we have verse, chorus, bridge, chorus. So we still have the usual last 3 sections. We just have a really lengthy first one. And that's if you want to look at it that way. I'm pretty sure musically that the verses were very different too. So musically we might have like A, B, C, D, E, F, E or something like that, which feels very different from the standard A, B, A, B, C, B, but when you kind of place it out as verses, choruses, and bridges, you find some similarity with the standard structure there. But again, well, let me take that back a second. A lot of this is still rather negative. The chorus, though, seems to be a bit more positive, looking back at things. Trying just to remember. Says, you know, we shared this in the summer and we had a good time together. Lots of good memories with this person. There's definitely a bittersweetness where the sweet element is present here. Like he says, I feel sorrow remembering all of this, but I would rather remember all this than to have regretted meeting you at all. There is a positivity to that, something bright and powerful. But I don't think that it's the predominant voice of the lyrics. Most of this is still rather negative, and the music just doesn't line up with that. The only thing I can think then is, aside from the idea that they're just not designed to be understood together, the guitarists and drummers just make this kind of brighter black metal, and the vocalist puts his lyrics on top of it, and they call it a day. But I think we can also read it another way, where the combined effort is the bittersweetness. The lyrics are dark and heavy, and the music is the joy of having known this person, the joy of feeling this way, of being brought so far down because of the loss of someone who was that important in your life. It certainly sucks. The lyrics lean into that so hard, but it's better to feel this sorrow than to have not felt anything at all when this person passed. I don't know if I necessarily subscribe to that theory right now. It's sort of sitting in the back of my mind as a possibility. There's just too much of a divide, I feel, between the lyrics and the music to pull something positive out of that isn't more explicitly stated. It feels like a hypothesis, like a fan theory of what's going on. Granted, everything that I say as far as analysis in music is technically a fan theory, unless it lines up with something that the artists have specifically stated in the past. But I tend to like to have a little bit more substance to my takes than to just say, well, maybe this is what happens. I like to have more conviction when I have an opinion of what art is supposed to be saying, and I don't have that with that read. All right, let's push forward. We'll be moving into track 3's Thanatos. Let's dive in, see what's going on. So this is bringing the gloom back from Call in the Rain, especially from the intro. Some interesting detuned notes in there, I think. What felt like a very open atmosphere feels very constrained now. Is this how Funeral Dream sounded? Once again, we have a melodic guitar line above the main guitars giving us our dyads, and it has a more optimistic melody to it. Cymbal part's wild. It almost sounded MIDI triggered, like trap cymbals. And cleans. Okay. And harmonized cleans. Yeah, you can immediately feel how much smaller this feels with the electric guitar. I think part of that is the massive reverb on the clean electrics. Why didn't I pick this up on Calling the Rain? I mean, Funeral Dreams didn't have the two sides, but Calling the Rain felt more measured. This last section, I think, carried some of the weight from the acoustic section, but now that we put this melody back on top over here, I don't know. Feels very optimistic again. Kind of groovy out of nowhere. Why did this last 30 seconds remind me of like a metal version of La Dispute? Those toms they're by themselves. It's so hard not to hear it. I think I'm warming up to this. I'm still not a big fan of what I assume in this song is going to be a continued division between the way the music makes me feel and the way the lyrics make me feel. But I think generally speaking on a sonic level, this is starting to work for me. It's Blackened post-hardcore. Funeral Dreams, I still think if they do stuff like that, it's going to bounce off of me. But this reminds me of some of the things that I enjoyed about Calling the Rain. There's harmonies in here. I would even say some melodies that just feel very familiar to me. And it's all wrapped up in a package that isn't familiar. And I find that to be interesting. I'm glad we got back to the clean electrics, though. The opening of this song was gorgeous. I thought it was a great way to bring some of that moodiness back from track one and re-establish it as the defining emotional element of the album. Funeral Dreams, I still think veered a little too far away from that, just going into wall of sound metal stuff, which I have a tough time reading emotion in anyways. We had a couple moments like that, and here it's just it's white noise. It's like static on a TV. I don't have any reaction to that. It's just sound. But we get these beautiful multi-guitar ideas like we saw in the middle of this track, at the beginning of this track, several places in Calling the Rain. You're going to start hitting me. You're going to get me hooked into your emotional storytelling. And it happens right here. Once again, they have these moments, and it's not like it's super intricate, classical guitar duet or anything like that. It's usually one moving idea and one ornamental idea with movement within it, and using those to sort of layer up and add frill to a pretty standard rhythmic idea. As I mentioned during Calling the Rain, a lot of these keep it that rigid rhythm. Even when we have that nice moving guitar lick from the beginning of the song, from the end of the song, from the middle, they're all still constant eighth notes. They're just more melodic than sitting on a standard chord or sitting on a single chord and just playing it repeatedly. There's also a variety of attacks to them too to help break up that rhythmic rigidity a little bit. And then when you start ornamenting that too, you're going to get even more flourish around that idea. It's going to feel less rigid, less singular in vision, and feel a bit more multifaceted. It's all the little things coming together that help pull it out of that standard black metal, one rhythm sound that almost this entire album has sort of rested on. It's probably my biggest complaint with the album. As much as I enjoy the mixing of ideas, rhythmically, the entire album is still hyper focused on either quarter notes, eighth notes, or 16th notes. There's very little past that, although we do have the 3-3-3-2 idea that pops up every once in a while. That gives us a dotted quarter note, so we have a little bit of like the simplest uh, rhythmic syncopation going on. Everything else, though, it's like we're playing a bunch of quarter notes in a row, we're playing a bunch of eighth notes in a row, we're playing a bunch of 16th notes in a row. You pick a note length and you play it a lot. Now, fortunately, though, much like Calling the Rain, there's a lot of melodic ideas going on top of this one, and that helps pull my mind away from probably what is more texture work more often than anything else. It's what I've said about black metal in the past, is it's really good at crafting texture. It's really good at crafting atmosphere. Even outside of atmospheric black metal, which really leans into the strength of the genre, I think it's just one of the things they do very well. Seeing that guitar tone is one of the most important parts of the genre itself. I've always said that black metal is more of a sonic style than a compositional one. I still have a hard time finding anything that separates black metal from, say, thrash metal or even speed metal as far as composition goes. It sounds different, but many of the same devices are used, writing devices are used in this whole group of genres right here. So it's a sonic genre, and I think that it being more atmospherically leaning, you gotta know how to use that strength, and I think it's done well here too, to sit underneath more melodic ideas. It works in those moments. It does. It allows the song to have this intensity, this large feeling, to put this weight down on the listener, and then they can put a lighter guitar melody on top of that. The heavy vocals lean into this idea as well. This is something I don't think I've brought up yet, but is absolutely true for all three of these tracks. The heavy vocals add to the weight of the song. It helps to keep that pressure pushed down on the listener. What's going on with the production though? I'm, dude. Funeral Dreams was one style throughout. That was the most straightforward black metal track so far. So I'm just gonna exclude it. We didn't have a lot of sonic diversity on that one. But Calling the Rain, I should have heard the difference between the vast reverb heavy clean electric sections and the more constrained, claustrophobic, aggressive, distorted guitar sections. And I don't remember hearing that at all. I never brought it up. It's not even something like, oh yeah, I meant to talk about that. Like, no, I never even thought about it. Never crossed my mind. But here in track 3, it was immediately noticeable. Coming off of the clean electric intro into that first metal section, it felt like we had this vast soundscape, and then out of nowhere we decided to shrink it. Now we're only going to make a sound that's this big, and it feels small. It eventually fills out as we put more 16th note playing, more texture, another set of guitars around what the band's doing right here. But for a solid 8 bars, it felt tiny compared to the cleans, and that's not how guitar sounds typically work. Our brains are pretty good at figuring out what the volume level of a sound should be. If there's a lot of airiness and whispery to it, you expect it to be quieter. And if there's compression or distortion to it, especially with vocals, you expect someone to be yelling, to be putting a lot of air flow through. You expect it to be louder. And that comes through in guitars too. When you have all this distortion, when you have all this compression and overdrive to it, I mean, overdrive is literally pushing the sound beyond and intentionally clipping the sound. I mean, you're basically saying I've turned this so loud we can't play the full tone of it anymore, and we've lost the details, and that's what the really cool metal guitar sound is. And so this idea that it sounds smaller than the clean electric, even though technically, scientifically, it's so loud the amp can't produce the sounds properly, we have a problem here, and that feels weird to me. I don't think it's going to feel weird to everyone, but if you feel that way about sometimes you're listening to music and you're like, oh, the volume levels feel weird, it's probably because of that. On a subconscious level, we understand the differences between sounds and perceived volumes. And I got that right there in that first verse. It felt too small for the sounds that were coming out. Do I think it works artistically? Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Like I said, eventually, once we fill out the part that we've now left silent, it feels okay. But that's from like a purely musical level of like, we're at this size, we're going to drop it down, bring it back up. This is no different than reducing the size, volume of something to punch it back up and it feel full again. And I think from that perspective, it works. Then why does it bounce off of me? I don't know. I'm really trying to come around to this album. I want to like it. I really do. And it seems to throw me these wrenches around every corner. Speaking about wrenches, dude, total surprise here. Clean Electrics came in. I was so happy for that. I'm like, yeah, cool, another melodically driven section. Let's go. And then we got some clean vocals. And then those clean vocals were harmonized with another layer of clean vocals. Yeah, I'm down for that. You know, not my favorite vocals. I'm usually a fan of higher range vocals. I mean, I listen to whiny emo kids, right? That's the kind of vocalist I like to listen to, that I go out of my way to listen to. But by no means is he a bad vocalist. I greatly enjoy that over the harshes. It has its place. I think it's better used as a contrast to the harsh vocals, although honestly, if we kept a low energy album, or let me put it this way, if Harakiri for the Sky decided to make a low energy album, something very doom and gloom and acoustic guitars, I'd be here for that. His vocals would work so well. There's a darkness, there's a pain in his clean vocals that I don't hear in his harshes. And I've talked about this before. Harsh vocals for me are very hit and miss. Sometimes I can feel extreme emotion out of them, others I can't. Part of it I really think is style, the form of harsh vocals, whether it's a false chord or a fry scream or the mixed. The mixed, I'm more likely to hear emotion out of because you can inject your own characteristics, your own vocal colorings into that. You can control the pitch quite a bit more easily. Um, this is your Chester Bennington. This is your standard post-hardcore vocalist. Your screamo vocalist. The ones that feel a bit more dynamic. The other two styles are typically used in a more monotonous manner, and I just don't click with either one of them. And of course, here, I think we have a fry scream. I honestly don't know what style it is, but it's very monotone. It just does its thing, and it turns into a texture. It's something that gets pushed into the background for me. I don't really pay a lot of attention to it now, especially the first song. I paid a little bit more attention, but it's been progressively getting pushed into the background because it doesn't change. It's just that static sound in the back of the song. But when those cleans came on, I was like, this guy's in pain. I felt that. It shone through that performance so much better than the harshes. And the harshes are supposed to be your extremity, right? That basic singing doesn't cover it anymore, so you have to resort to wailing or screaming or growling, whatever. Whatever your emotion is, animalisticness, rage, depression, pain, sorrow, joy, whatever reason. This is like in a musical when talking doesn't work anymore, so you break into song to better express your emotion. That's what harshes are supposed to be. At least that's what they are to me. When it just becomes the norm, the breakaway is the clean. That's where the emotion, for me, gets felt. I was surprised by it initially and then moved by it as I got more into it. I wish we had more of that. I really do. Great coloring on the timbre. He has the voice for this type of story. And like I said, it hits me a lot better than the harshes. I feel them in a way I don't with the harshes. And they demand to be heard, too. Maybe it is just contrast. We hadn't heard that timbre at all. It was fresh, so my ears perked up to it. I don't know why, but I couldn't ignore it. Not the same way that my mind just naturally dismisses the harshes after hearing them for 30 minutes now. I really hope we get more of that. I really do. It adds a heart to the song that I don't, well, to the album that I haven't felt at all up until it and didn't hear after it. And I find that to be a shame because this is a powerful album lyrically. I just have such a tough time connecting with that emotion. The first set of lyrics caught me off guard. Started to tear up a little bit. But none of the music has pushed me towards that. We have listened to plenty of music where I haven't even touched the lyrics yet, and I'm in tears. The music, the delivery, the performance has expressed the emotion phenomenally. This is the opposite. I don't really get much out of this music. What I do get out of it usually is too bright for what the lyrics are showing, but the vocals certainly I'm not getting any emotion out of. And I think that sucks because this is an album that I think could easily bring me to my knees, just absolutely break me. And I don't think that's going to happen if the music continues this way. I would love to hear other people's interpretation of this, though, especially if you're a black metal listener. and you can pull the emotion, you can feel the emotion in this extreme metal stuff. Yeah, let me know if this is exceptionally heartbreaking for you. I don't listen to this kind of stuff. Like I've said at the beginning, it's not my scene. I have a tough time getting into it already. There's a barrier of entry to start with. But many of these decisions are pushing me further away. And I want to know if that's a me thing or, if I'm in the majority or the minority here, I suppose. I'm just kind of curious how many people listen to this and they're just like bawling. They're like, dude, I don't know how this doesn't affect you. And if that's true, like, I'd like to know maybe if you are introspective enough to tell me why you think the album affects you that way. And I'm really curious if it's beyond the lyrics. Like I said, the lyrics are effective. They really are. It doesn't pair with the music for me. Speaking of, let's dive into some lyrics for Thanatos. We continue to see another track about how the pain of this person's suicide is affecting the lyricist. I'm going to assume that this is. No, I'm not going to assume that. I'll look into that later, I suppose, if this is the real feelings of the lyricist or if this is a story that they've crafted. Basically, I guess, is this death fictional and these emotions fictional, or did the singer of this album have someone close to them pass away from suicide and this is their real vulnerable art that they're putting out? I'm going to go on the latter. It's what I was going to lean towards simply because I find the lyrics to be expressly tense and dark and heavy. If this is what they're thinking just for creativity's sake, it's powerful. It feels like someone who's lived through this. Says, childhood ends and all of our dearest friends leave the town that we were born in and grew up all together. The year's over, but it's quite hard for me to be cheerful about it because the loss of secureness beggars my confidence by far. Verse 2. With the end of every day, I get more paranoid by the certainty of mortality and death. Lunatic, I know, but just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean that they're not after me at all. He basically says that because of his friend's death, he feels death knocking at his own door. Maybe not quite knocking yet, but he can feel the presence. He has become more certain of his mortality. He feels more certain of his death. He says, yeah, I know it's crazy. You can call me paranoid, but that doesn't mean that they're not after me. Just because I'm afraid of people being after me doesn't mean that they're not. And in this case, people is death. Now, this is just 7 straight verses, no choruses, no bridges, no outros. Very linear. Musically, it wasn't, though. That's another way that the lyrics and the music separate quite a bit. It's another thing that makes me think that maybe the music was written to be the music and the lyrics were put on top of it. Or maybe vice versa. Although I don't know how someone could read these lyrics and think that this is the music they want to play with it. But it doesn't feel like this stuff was done at the same time with the intention of being played together from the start. Verse 4, I find really interesting. It says, sometimes things have to fall apart to make way for better ones. This happens for different reasons, and most of them the wrong ones. Sometimes I'm on the brink to stab my heart because of this sadness, but everything happens for a reason, whether we like it or not. Basically, trying to come to terms with this. Why did this happen? How do I get away from this? How do I remove the pain? How do I move on knowing that a friend of mine decided to commit suicide? Trying to reason it. Things happen. Things happen for reasons. Things are improved. Says sometimes that doesn't happen, though. That sometimes things happen for the wrong reasons. But he has to believe that it happened for a reason, that it wasn't random. that makes it less meaningful, maybe. Talks about how his life has been on a downward spiral in sorts. He says, the life has dulled me abysmally and crowned me the king of shards. It kept sucking me dry till there was nothing left. The sons of apathy consigned their souls to escort me. They won't see nor find me among their shadows, since I'm a ghost now. Says that he's full of apathy. He's become apathetic to life. He just can't connect to anything, becoming emotionally numb. Part of it is because of the news, but I think part of it is also that life has just worn him down over the years anyways. This is a terrible event on a series of terrible events. And so we go into a bit of a nihilistic direction from here. He says, at least this claiming of death means nothing. Life, in short, is just a fallacy. To love, to die, I've said before that it's all rigged in advance, merciless, devastating illusions. Talking about fate here. That it's all a choice to do any of this. It was all preordained anyways. You were going to do it. He says, what you call love or affection is just a figment. Someday you'll see I was right. And this opens up an interesting question too. Is this person always this nihilistic? It's taken 3 songs to expose this side. Or is this just the way that they're choosing to express their pain, their anguish? Because they're numb, because they're apathetic now, because life has taken so much from them and has continued to take something larger than anything before, that they now feel like there's nothing left. It must all be one sick comedy joke. Life in general. With all of the speak about possibly taking his own life, in response to this, we're going to go into track 4, This Life as a Dagger. Let's dive into this one, see what's going on next. Very ominous, foreboding. Great atmosphere here, keeping a bit of negative energy. Something we've seen consistently in most of the openings, but something that gets lost along the way on each track. I do like the more melodic drumming that we had there at the beginning too. Even with the full band, we continue to have this weight, not just sonically, but also harmonically. interesting to continue to use those dissonant dyads in the background of this more layered atmosphere. They're still tucked in way underneath though. I highly doubt they wanted to make me chuckle there, but the blackened version of a black kind of really took me off guard. Ooh, I like that cymbal. Right here? Nope, did a different fill this time. There's a cymbal fill 4 bars ago that I liked. Interesting how different this feels emotionally, shifting from the clean electric to the heavy electric. That same riff is being played here. It just doesn't have the same emotion to me. I get a sort of calm optimism out of that new lead guitar, soaring above everything else, so light and free. So that last section was a very clear reminder of how I'm not the target audience for this. I really felt that just before those double bass kicks came in, that was the peak of the song. We had the harsh vocals in there. We had the tense dyads on the guitars in the background. We had the moving chordal stuff going on underneath everything. The drums were sparse but heavy. Lots of intensity behind each hit. I was like, okay, this is the emotional peak of the song. This is good. You know, I can get behind this. There's parts of it that aren't my cup of tea, but I'm getting into this, right? And then they put the double bass kicks in, and I can feel that it's gotten heavier. Technically, there's more going on. The bass kicks are a lower end instrument. It feels heavier and bigger, but it doesn't feel more impactful. In fact, to me, it feels less impactful. You took something that I thought was already peak. I mean, this is the biggest you could get, and you put too much in the bubble now and it popped. And so we just have all of this stuff that fell out of the bubble. The metaphor isn't perfect, but I hope you get where I'm going with that. It took something that I thought was so well done and went overboard on it. And almost, in a sense, it became too absurd. It was too much of everything. And you can certainly have too much metal, too much bass kick, too much drums, too many layers. Now, the thing is that that's all bias. That's all subjective. You may listen to that and you think the bass kicks were the icing on the cake, that the song was great and then they threw that in there and it was perfect. You might have thought that the section without the double bass kicks was fine, but it was only good once the bass kicks got brought in. You know, everyone's going to have a different response to that. For me, though, yeah, it took me out of it. I had my eyes closed. I don't know. I was in the moment. I was really enjoying the emotion of that section. And then the bass kicks came in and it just sucked me right out of it. I'm back in, my room with a camera in front of me listening to music. I wasn't engaged with the art anymore. And it was one simple decision to put another layer in there. And at that point, I was like, yep, what I want out of music, what I connect to in music, it's not what Harakiri does. It's not how they view music. It's not the kind of music they want to make. I'm not the audience for this. And that kind of ties into more of this. I mentioned at the end of Thanatos that I was getting into it. I know I kind of went on some rants about stuff that still doesn't work for me, but I do think generally there are parts of this album that I enjoy. Calling the Rain and Thanatos had a lot of them. There are certainly parts in this that have that Blackened post-hardcore vibe going on that I can groove with. This song, I think, had less of those moments, but there were still a few of them. There are parts of this album that I enjoy. I do want to enjoy this more. I just keep running into these hurdles. And it's not just disrupting my enjoyment, it's also disrupting my understanding of the song. There are so many decisions that feel like they get the exact opposite response out of me that I think they're going for. And this song in particular had quite a few of them. But it had so much going right, too. I want to bring this up. This is probably the best opening after Calling the Rain. Absolutely phenomenal. We introduce with the clean electrics. They have a very moody, oppressive vibe to them. They're dark, they're depressive, they're heavy, they linger. And then we convert it into the electric guitars. We bring drums in, we bring the electric bass in, and all of it is complementary. It changes a little bit. Because we have the electric guitars instead of the clean, that the bite has a different feel to it, but it still has a generally oppressive sound to it. And I think everything ends up working really well here. We have the harsh vocals come in not too long after this, and it feels weighty. It feels gloomy. It feels like despair in a way that I haven't felt on this album at all. There are more depressive, melancholic sections, sure, but there's always something in them, whether it is a tone, a timbre, or a melody that tries to pull it out of that. And sure, there's a couple sections in this track too. I even mentioned that, was it like 5 minutes in? I was like, this guitar line sounds like it's floating above everything else, like it's weightless, it's carefree. It was a very strange melody to put on top of something as heavy and as much of a downer as we were just in. But here at the beginning, it carries all of that weight and it has a feeling of despair in a way that the rest of the album hasn't. It has to do with the way that the layers are written, it has to do with the harmonies at play. I feel like this is one of the few times where chord resolutions resolve or chord progressions resolve in a downward manner, where the movement from the third to the fourth or the fourth to the fifth chord, which is starting it over on a four chord loop, is in a downward manner where it sounds like we're going from higher notes to lower notes. There's so many chord progressions in here that resolve upward, which feels like an uplift even if the resolving chord still has tension within it, which is what happens a lot of the time in here. I think it's what adds to that bittersweetness that's present through a lot of this, is that these rising resolutions, they feel like we're going up towards something. And while I think you can have melancholic chord progressions that resolve upwards, it's going to be it's going to be an uphill battle, to use a pun, I suppose, because a lot of people are going to feel that uplift as a positive thing. We're not sliding down into anything. And this is just, what is it? Not word painting. Word painting's a cool thing. I don't think we've had any of that in here either. I guess just sonic painting then, when specific musical ideas convey pictures or images or feelings of movement outside of, like, minor chords are dreary and melancholic. Like, that's more of a characteristic of a single sound, more so than a feeling of multiple sounds played um, in a row consecutively. That's the word I wanted. I went on a weird thing. Going back to this opening though, it hits everything right. I really liked this, even though it was the furthest deviation from, I think, the general sound that I enjoy the most. I think from an artistic perspective, this is where they nailed it. And I don't think another part of the song really returned to that. They love to put these higher range guitar melodies that focus on more positive sounds in general, more positive movements of notes on top of this heavy weightiness. And the only thing I've come to a conclusion on this is that it's a separation between the lyricist and their story, sinking down into this pain and anguish. And he talks a couple of times about how death is a release, how his friend is no longer is now free of this world. He even says that when you lose everything, you can become free of life. That was Funeral Dreams, was it? There is a freedom in death in the perspective of the narrator, the lyricist here. And I wonder if the freedom, the weightlessness, the lack of gravity on some of these melody lines is supposed to represent his friend now being free of the shackles of mortal life. Lyrically, nothing has really leaned into that aside from a couple of stray lines about how he views death to be a freedom, but there's nothing in here that explicitly says that he's feeling low and he's happy that his friend is now free. So again, it's another read that I have on this division that I don't think has a really strong supporting element in the art, but I'm still really trying to understand it at all. And my brain continues to cycle through theories on this. Now, here is something that isn't a great topic to bring up for an album review, You may have noticed some of these analysis sections are paling in length compared to that 50-minute opening after the first track. 40-minute, I don't remember what it was. I'm having less and less unique things to talk about with these tracks because they all feel the same to me. Minor changes, sure. Funeral Dream, straightforward black metal. That separates it from everything else. Um, Life is a Dagger, having the best opening section to any song so far. That separates it from the rest. But in the general moment to moment, this album is all the same thing. We usually have some sort of guitar playing 16th notes. Maybe there's two of them. Either way, it fills out a very large sound of the foundation. They change their note every bar. That's our chord progression. The bass follows along with this. We usually have some sort of white noise on the outsides of that to create the sound sphere walls. We have the vocals and the drums in the center. The drums are usually going full blast on 8th notes or 16th notes, and then we have an 8th note melody played alongside that. It's not fair, I think, to say an album has the same blueprint on every track. That's actually how a lot of albums are created. Especially once you get closer to the mainstream side of things, it's very easy to be overly reductive about what music is from an artist. But because of the wall of sound that occurs on this, and this is something I've brought up with black metal and even post metal sometimes, but definitely black metal, is that it all kind of sounds the same to me because I have a problem hearing past that wall of sound. And so while there might be different licks and different riffs and maybe even different melodies at times, there's just such a wall of sound going on in most of these tracks that all I get out of it is weight and sorrow and then a happy melody. And so they're all sort of blending together into a very samey sound to me. And I will put some of that on me. That is my ear. That is me not being acclimated to this style of music. But also, that blueprint is quite present on this album. All of these songs, very similar. Again, Funeral Dream stands out as one that's just full on adrenaline, constant 16th notes on the drums. We don't really see that everywhere else. There's enough diversity in drum patterns on the other three tracks so far. But rhythmic diversity on the drums is still rather shallow too. As I mentioned earlier, you're doing quarter notes, eighth notes, or 16th notes, and there's no intermingling of them. You pick one length and you just play that length repeatedly 4 minutes at a time. The only breakaways that we really have are the clean electric sections, which again return to a rigid rhythmic side, but at least we get to explore new atmosphere. But we've had 3, 4 of those maybe in 40 minutes. They're the exception to the rule more than anything else. And while I love them for being a bit of contrast, they're not popping up quite enough for me to say that it really helps in the big picture. I find a lot of these sections to end up feeling very samey for me despite that. So, unless they drastically change their style up, I don't know that I'm going to have a lot more in-depth things to say about their music, except for little one-off ideas like the intro to this one, which is very different from the rest of their album. With that said, though, we only have less than 40 minutes to go, so maybe they'll change some things up for this back half. Maybe they won't. I don't know. Let's dive into some lyrics, see what's going on with this Life as a Dagger. Alright, this track is about finally making it over to where his friend was buried and coming to terms with all of this. Says it took me almost a year to come. I thought I'd appear here prior to that, though. Says our past caught up with me again. This horizon of mountains, as always threatening, rose up behind me like an all-shattering orb. Talking about how things feel overwhelming in this place. The chorus says, never ever this melancholy will pass. I set foot in our city and I feel so relegated. The days we lived here as kids don't seem too far gone. Yeah, he hasn't been here in a while. Despite all the time that's passed, it still feels fresh. Like it really isn't that long of a time since he left. It says, I carried this picture for the last 280 days just to put it near your last smile. So near, but far beyond. Then I did all my tweak and sniffed it off your tombstone. Believe me, brother, I gulped it all in one. Now, we already talked earlier, was it a track or two ago, that he said that he was going to do a bunch of drugs and stay drunk in order to not have to feel anything. I think this showcases that right here. He's at the hardest part of his journey so far in grief. He said it took him far too long to come here. He figured he'd be able to say his goodbyes a lot sooner. It's been tough to get to the graveyard, though. And now that he's here, the pressure of it all, revisiting all of these memories, feeling this pain again. So he does a bunch of drugs. He says he gulped it all down at once. He's got to feel that numbness again. He says, I'll never write peace on your wings and let you simmer wordlessly. You promised that if we left this place, we would set free as one. But you spoke the words of a coward. What have you done? It's interesting. We do have this element here where he's upset at his friend for leaving. One, because he's gone, but two, also because they were supposed to go together. What I find most interesting about this was track 1, track 2. One of these, he had mentioned that the person who passed away. Oh, it was track 1. It was in the chorus. It says, you are not my closest friend, but the longest serving. Between that line and the fact that he's had to drive in from out of town and he didn't know about this until days after it happened, what it says to me is that they weren't really as close as they were when they were kids, which makes sense. As people grow older and physically, separate themselves, those relationships also get weaker over time. It's harder to maintain them. So any sort of bond that they might have made together earlier in life, kind of hard to keep up with that. How are you supposed to call your friend and say, hey, tonight's the night I'm planning to do it, and I know we plan to go together. You in? Like that's a hard phone call to make. And also, if you're convinced that this is what you want to do, that's a good way to get convinced out of it too, to tell your plans to somebody. That's why people tend to leave notes to find after the fact. So I understand his being upset here, but it's also interesting that this feels like it comes from a very different place than how we were introduced to this other person at the beginning of the album. But it's also what makes it feel very human too. Like I had mentioned, I don't know if this is fictional or nonfiction, but regardless, it feels very real. These songs, the lyrics, the emotions behind them, they feel real. They feel lived. They're conflicting. They jump around between ideas rapidly. Grief is not something that makes sense. I like this part here, especially given how many of these other tracks he's talked about how he's ready to take his life now, too. It all sort of circles itself back in while also contradicting things that have been said earlier. It is beyond human. It is human. What am I talking about? It's just it's another thing that leads me to think that this is all real. That the vocalist or lyricist really did lose someone close to them, and this is their way of sifting through that pain. moving on into the back half. The next track is called The Traces We Leave. Some very cool drum fills on this album. They tend to be a bit more snare heavy, and I find that to be an interesting decision given the way that the writing for the drums tends to be. Ooh. It's interesting, this song has had the harshest transitions into the metal, but it actually has had the smoothest ones out of the metal sections. that last section. That might be one of my favorites on the album so far. Kind of surprised me for a second that this was still track 5. I don't know, it felt like it's been more than 8 minutes. It's an interesting finale to that. I'm gonna let it... I know it's another 8 minutes of music, but I don't have much to say about that one that I haven't said about the other songs. They definitely have a groove, they have a style, it's unique for them, but they don't deviate too far away from it. This one's bordering on power metal. That progression right there. Interesting also just allowing these chords to hang out and then to put that break at the end of it too. That pause. Very different from the rest of the music they've written. the way the song bottomed out right here. A lot of the stuff that made it feel lighter was sort of removed, and it just left with the weight of the section. That's an interesting chord progression, too. It doesn't feel like it uses functional harmony. It doesn't feel like it resolves at the end either. I think it's interesting, back at the beginning of the album, I talked about the vocal production being clear enough that I can understand it. That last section, it was so tucked into the mix. This is a fun section, though. Kind of a swan core-ish idea to pull us into this black metal section. What? I like this moment too. This is nice. Why do I know that riff? some late 90s, early 2000s alt rock riff. What is that? My mind goes to like Offspring or Puddle of Mud, maybe. Why do I know that riff? That's a decision. This song was wild. Like I said about track 5, it's more of the same. That whole breakdown, the blueprint that I gave last analysis segment, that would be all I have to say about track 5. Nothing in there really stood out to me as new or unique. Pretty much the same pros and cons that I've had for the whole album is present there. This one, though, what was with the punky thing going on there? Where the drums brought in a syncopated idea, not for very long either, like 15, 20 seconds maybe out of the whole album. They just threw it there. I'm really curious what the lyrics were saying there. There's got to be something harmonically, melodically. Nothing really changes. The atmosphere of the song is the same that it's always been, this hazy gray. And then the drummer's just like, yeah, let me throw some syncopated bass kicks in here against a 2/4 snare beat. Why? It felt very dancey, very bouncy. If that was a decision. A short-lived one, too, which makes me question it even more. It feels like it was just thrown in there for random sake, and I hope it isn't. I'd like to know the intention behind it, but I can't see any reasoning or meaning for why to do that. The other thing that stood out to me here is that second to last riff. I can't even speak. Does anybody know what that is or what it's close to? Like I said, my mind, as soon as I heard like the first 2 notes, I was like, Puddle of Mud. No, that ain't right. Offspring, maybe? And just like, I just have this idea that I've heard that riff, that chord progression, almost chord for chord, in some late 90s, early 2000s alternative rock song. And again, that's another thing that kind of came out of nowhere. That kind of sound hasn't been present on this album at all. It has a very different emotional weight to it. It kind of fits what's going on, but not my general idea of this album. It carries a lot of the weight that I wish this album would have leaned into, but that's not what they do. So why bring a little bit of that weight in now? That was such a bizarre segment. The ending to this track was wild too. A chord progression, a brand new chord progression that just kind of stops, and then there's I don't know if it was like a voice sound, like a mouth sound, or maybe it was, I don't know, a hitting of something. It just sounded not musical, just like noise, clattering of things. A lot of interesting parts of this song that I can't make heads or tails of, which is pretty big for an album that I haven't really been able to make heads or tails of things. For something to stand out. Jeez. Here's something else I picked up here. I want to retroactively fit it into the other tracks, but I don't feel confident enough to do that yet. So really, I'm just going to be looking at these last two songs and seeing how this fits in with them before I feel more confident in saying that the album went in this direction. My gut says it's possible, but I didn't notice it before. There's no functional harmony in the last three chord progressions on this track, minus that weird alternative rock one that I can't place. That did use functional harmony. Functional harmony is just a phrase that we have given to a pattern of ways to use chords. So it's not necessarily a science of music, but just historically looking across, hundreds of years of music. The Western world in particular has used these specific chords to craft a specific narrative. We've given them jobs within a chord progression, whether they are rest, tension, or resolution. It's a lot more in depth than that, but that's generally the idea of it. How do you start a chord progression? How do you know where to take it? And why do chord progressions feel right when they end on specific chords? Yeah, we don't really get that here. These chord progressions, they do that in a soft kind of way, but the first and second tend to feel rather stable. Not in a connected way, it's just like two stable chords, usually one lower one into a higher one. It's this uplift that appears so much in this music that it just doesn't feel very negative to me at times. And then the third one either starts out negative or it only lasts for half of the length of all the other ones, and then we have a second chord that goes into tension. But regardless, in this third bar, there's tension present somewhere, and then it doesn't resolve. The thing with this third chord, this is a leading tone. It tells you where you need to be going next. It points in a direction and say, hey, that chord right there, that's where you should be going. Usually, all the notes in your chord are going to be usually one step away from a resolved idea. And they're going to be on unstable intervals. They're going to point towards more stable intervals. So they're going to be pointing towards your threes and your fives and your eights, stuff like that. And here they do go to a more stable chord, but it is not where the tense one points to. And so when I listen to the chord progressions, like I said, the last three in this track here, they're all, like, if I translate this to language, they're all words. I can kind of see a sentence out of it, but it's missing grammar. It's like caveman speak. It generally follows what I expect, but it's missing key elements, like transition words and ises and articles, like and the, and like it's a really rough, barbaric type of a chord progression in a sense. I think that kind of works for what they're going for. There's a general cyclicality to that because there's a lack of this perfect function going on. And so it feels like we're just kind of moving between the chords, almost as if we're on autopilot. It's not perfect, like there's a lot of effort put into it, but it's enough to get by. Maybe like someone who's feeling numb from grief, just going through the motions. But also, like I mentioned, there's kind of a barbaric element to it where the function's there, but the form isn't. It's not as elegant as it could be. And that could also be something that comes through grief as well. It could also be just how they feel. They feel like they can get things done, but it's not going to be as well as normal. They're going to function in a less than pretty way, so to speak. I don't know if that's necessarily their intention here. I like to give bands the benefit of the doubt, and since this does line up thematically, I want to go in that direction. But also, given how the emotion of the music doesn't line up with the lyrical ones usually, And there's just so much of a divide between the musical themes and the lyrical ones. I have a tough time thinking that this was this odd part, this such a small part. Harmony isn't something that most metalheads are too concerned with. That this is where the crossover is actually going to link. So I'd love to see an interview from these guys to talk to them about. Um, well, I'd love to read an interview where they talk about it, the process of creating this music, this album, and where any parallels are drawn between the compositional side of things and the lyrical side of things. Because I have such a tough time seeing how any of it's connected. I finally landed on something, and it feels like more of a coincidence than anything else. But I hate doing that, robbing intentionality and execution from artists. I don't normally like to go that path. It's a weird thing if this is the one part that they decided that they needed to link up on. It's just highly unusual for metal in general, outside of like progressive metal, which, like I mentioned, this kind of is, but it also kind of isn't. It's unorthodox for blackened metal, but I don't know if I'd necessarily call it progressive either. I don't know. Again, I'm curious how everyone else feels about this. I do feel like I'm quite a bit the outsider on this, but if even metalheads are like, yeah, actually, I don't get a lot of connection here. Okay, I'm not here because of my biases, because of the type of music I like. Now, one thing I do want to bring up, and I kind of feel dumb for not talking about this yet because it's a huge part of their composition that I love. I really want to shine a light on. They play a lot of clean electric guitar underneath the heavy distorted stuff. I don't know if I want to read into that yet. There's things to pull out of that, a way of being vulnerable, putting your heart on your sleeve, allowing, even though you're putting up this big, meaty, metallic wall, right, that you still show this smaller part in the music. There's a lot of ways to look at that thematically. But I do enjoy that it's here. In fact, I think it's one of the better parts of the album, not just because of the inclusion, but because of what the lighter, cleaner electric guitar parts actually end up playing. They get some of the more dexterous, beautiful things that would get muddied up if they were played an octave lower with a ton of distortion. But I love how it gets integrated into the metal side too. So many of these songs start off with clean electric parts and then the metal comes in, but it's not replaced usually. Sometimes we have seen where they just basically flip on the overdrive and now we're playing that same opening riff on full distortion. But there's so many songs too that just end up putting the metal on top of that. It is still there. That vulnerability, that softness, that beauty is now hidden underneath all of this heaviness, this weight, this angry sound from the distorted guitars. And of course, in other parts of the song, that clean electric guitar gets put on top of all of that. It's a melody that sits above all the noise. The variety in that and the different ways to read into it artistically and just the way that it sounds sonically. I really appreciate all of that. And I'll be completely honest here, as much as I'm not really connecting with this album on an artistic level, I'm not really finding a lot of compositional elements to dive into and tell you all that this album's great because it does these things with the composition and stuff like that. I am generally enjoying the album. I think a lot of that has to come down to the novelty of it. Again, this is so core adjacent. It definitely has a lot of post-hardcore in it. I have heard some Law Dispute at times, and at one point I even mentioned that it had a very cool swancore guitar riff lead into, I think we led back into a chorus on The Traces We Leave, right? Swancore is basically, in a sense, progressive post-hardcore. I'm not a big fan of the Swancore label, but that's what people have landed on. These are your bands like Dance Gavin Dance and Hail the Sun. Both of them a bit on a different spectrum. Dance Gavin Dance tends to be brighter and poppier. Hail the Sun still having palatability and poppiness in the lyrics. Sorry, in the vocals, but tends to be darker harmonically. So much like most progressive genres, there's a wide spectrum to what fits in there. But yeah, I kind of felt some like Dance Gavin Dance inspiration there. Then we had the punky idea there in track 6, the drums. It's interesting to hear these atmospheres and this bright. Honestly, here's the thing, right? I'm listening to this. This album puts a smile on my face so often, just listening to how light. I don't know if carefree is the word for it, but there's a freedom in a lot of this music. I mentioned, was it the beginning of track 6, 5, one of those two that, I was like, we're on the verge of power metal here. The chord progression felt very adventurous and big, and it really felt like it was going to explode into something more epic. It, of course, didn't go that way, which makes sense for the album's themes. I thought it would have been a really weird divide there if they had got into power metal. But the end result is that a lot of this song ends up feeling very uplifting to me. And when you pair that with all the fuzz and occasionally even the double bass kicks, it creates something that to me feels very warm and fuzzy. Not necessarily something I find comfortable, but something that I don't mind being within. Which I guess comfortable works too, but I think when you talk about comfortable music, it kind of invokes something different. The idea for me of comfortable music is something that you really enjoy. It's like your bread and butter, your main genre, what you feel most at home with. But this album ends up feeling very comfortable to me. It's almost relaxing in a lot of ways. And again, none of these ways of describing the music, I think, pair with the lyrical content at all. And honestly, I think if I had listened to this on my own, I don't check out lyrics on a first time through, I think I'd have a very different relationship to this album because I wouldn't have this schism. I wouldn't be concerned, not even necessarily concerned. It's not like I'm actively choosing to do this. I like synergy in my art. I would be completely unaware of the thematic divide going on in this album. And ignorance is bliss. And I honestly think that I would, have a more positive review of this. Again, it's very similar from start to finish. You're not getting a lot of changes in here. I don't know if it's something I would want to revisit, but I definitely think I'd give it a thumbs up. This was a fun album. I enjoyed being in it, gave me good vibes, very warm and fuzzy. It's just very strange that that's how I describe the music of a song dealing with ridiculously weighty grief. I don't see how that gets paired together. I'm going to check out some lyrics for these two, and we're going to dive into the penultimate track. Track 5, The Traces We Leave. This song is about how our narrator blames the world for breaking people like his friend, and also for himself. He says, this world made me an alcoholic. It made me want to die in my sleep. It made me a junkie. Dyed in the wool, it made me a razor eater, a homeless fool. Says, no man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a piece of the main. I'm involved in mankind, and so are you, because we're both part of this vast and moribund clutter, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls, because it tolls for you and me. I find this interesting. Usually the phrase and the rest of that quote of no man is an island is about how we need other people, we need our connections to humanity in order to survive, that we can't survive alone. But here he's using it to help justify his idea that the world is what brought him down. He is depressed. He is an alcoholic. He does use drugs to numb out the parts of him that he doesn't like. But he didn't make himself that way, is what he's justifying here. He's part of his culture. He's part of what's around him, his environment. The world made him who he is. That's what he's trying to justify here, which is entirely true. Entirely, I think, is wrong. I think people have natures to them, but as we've seen time and time again, drug use and crime and a lot of negative aspects of society are typically tied to someone's ability to be happy, someone's ability to have food and a roof over their head and just live a comfortable life. As you begin to rob people of that, crime tends to rise, drug use begins to rise. People need purpose, and they need comfort, and they need security. It is definitely one part nature, but there's a big part of nurture in that too, of environment. I think that's what he's leaning into there. Verse 4 says, I didn't believe you as you once compared love to flames, but I guess you were right, because both leave nothing but ashes. For me, love was never tied to condition, and in the end, I loved you, but I chose darkness. I think that's interesting. That his love for his friend was completely unconditional. Even as they grew apart, as life progressed, he still loved this person. But it wasn't enough. They chose darkness, which is interesting because this was the verse that brought up flames, a light source that burns things to ash. I don't think they're supposed to be connected. This is once again, I think, more of a coincidence here, but I do think it's interesting that in his verse, we have a comparison of light and then later saying that they chose darkness. I don't know what the darkness is supposed to represent here. Immediately, I want to focus on a sort of negativity in life, but I don't know, it's vague. It says that day after day, maybe even years at a certain point, that now they're just on their own, and every stranger looks like you. Says that the traces we leave are vague, but they still catch sight, and sadly I'm still lost in a city where I shouldn't be at all. It's hard to wake up from a nightmare when you're not even asleep, but this world breaks everyone, and afterwards some are strong at the broken places. I like that. It speaks to an uncaring world. His worldview here is that everyone gets broken by their environment. Some people just survive and come out stronger on the other side. I don't know if I agree with that entirely, but I do think that I lean a little bit towards that one line that the world breaks everyone. I don't think it has to be that way, but I think generally speaking, as history has shown us, it has been that way. With track 6, we see our narrator falling deep into depression. In fact, the opening stanza blatantly states this: depression gets worse, and I buried all hope that medication will change this fact. It talks about feeling like life is a fever dream and that his only existence has been shackled. That the only purpose is to shatter those chains, but it's difficult to. He says, save me from staying around like a shadow. Save me from straying this maze of void. Escort me home, mother of dearest demise, because as a tragedian, I never learned to live. Basically saying, guide me to the next plane. I'm tired of this life. It just feels like this is the shackles being tied to this plane here. Death is the only freedom, as has been stated multiple times on this album. And he says, as his life has primarily been tragedy, he's never had an opportunity to even know how to live. The chorus states that everything great was built on sorrow, that the only thing left is to erode your insides. So he wants to be free from all of that. Towards the end of the track, he says, "Time heals nothing. It's just an appeaser. It leaves the dust of days and bears me as the outcast son. So sleep well, my friend. The journey has scarcely started. Pace yourself. We will still be walking for miles. I know the specters that haunt you in your dreams because they already welcomed me as one of them. Death to everyone." Really beginning to come around to this concept that death is the only freedom, it's the only choice you have. Otherwise, you're just bound by fate to aimlessly walk around this planet. He basically says, to his friend, "You may have gone before me, but I'm not that far behind you." He wraps this up with a final stanza that says, "We are a generation lost, born just to find all gods dead, all wars fought, and all faith in man shaken. A generation misunderstood, a generation in flames, the generation of the disrooted and the damned." I find that to be interesting. The annotation says that he was 26 at the time. He was born in 90, so not too much younger than me. I can feel this as a fellow millennial. Um, it almost seems like, at least from an American, I don't know where this band's from, but it seems that all of the good days are behind us. When I look back at the past 100 years of America, maybe even a little bit more, there was a lot of we had the American dream. And at the time, from what history says, which may be a bit, I don't know, celebrated more than might have been the truth of it, it seems though at the time things were better. Even look back to the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Look at the sitcoms of the times that were supposed to be showing what life was like. And you have, a family of five that live in a nice house, all based off of one 40-hour week paycheck of a average job, your average Joe. Being able to afford a house, go on vacation, all of this, one paycheck. The mother stays at home and raises the kids and stuff. And nowadays, you need two paychecks to to rent an apartment. Um, this idea of the American dream of working upwards and growing and being able to afford things and all of this, it's all gone. The idea of being born just in time to find out all the gods are dead, that is a wild statement. But I think technically Gen X is probably the first ones to do that, again, from an American standpoint. But like, I feel that line that all the powers that be are just gone. Any sort of grandeur, any sort of myth of what a life lived once looked like. Too many L's in that. It's a foreign concept to anybody born on this side of the 80s, maybe even like mid 70s. He calls this a generation in flames, a generation of the damned. Yeah, I mean, again, American perspective, but I've lived through two once in a lifetime recessions. A massive 20-year war that did nothing but disrupt the world. Uh, so many pivotal moments in weather history. We're hitting so many record highs and record lows and record number of storms and record number of earthquakes. Like, any idea that things are going well for us, it's left, it's gone. I don't know many people my age who still believe in this sort of mythical age of living anymore. The final line of the song then says, "There goes all hope." When you feel like the whole world is being flushed down the toilet and your life is kind of terrible on top of that, or within that, however you want to view that, and that there's no getting out of this. Your environment's not going to get better, much less are you going to improve in any way. Yeah, dude, I can see how that is just the most hopeless mindset. I think the lyrics have done a really great job at focusing on this one character's descent. One thing that I've talked about with concept albums is lyrical pacing. And one of my biggest pet peeves is when two or three songs straight will basically say the exact same thing. When it comes to concept albums, you have a very small area to put your lyrics in compared to like a book or a TV show or a film where dialogue and words, you just have a lot of room to describe things. In a 60-minute album, you don't. So I feel like you really have to be concise and masterful with your time. And, some concept albums we've listened to, expertly paced. Others, I'm like, yeah, you spent a lot of time talking about this one thing, and now I feel like we're devoid of some time for detail later. Maybe we should have balanced that out better. What I like about this one is that every single track is pretty much the same. As far as a concept album goes, it's got a lot of repetition in it, but it's about the modularity of it. There is a journey through this depression. And I think that we have seen a very strong, multifaceted display of this character's descent to where we get to this point in the story and it makes sense. I empathize totally with this person. This is one of those cases where repetition really works. It drives home a point, but it isn't totally consistent. There's always another spice added into the telling of this character's mindset, their mental state, a little thing that gives you a little bit more insight into their character. Well, I say character, I still think that this is probably a real life lived thing too. But it's just this slow evolution of understanding. It's a character study, basically. And so when we get to this point, I'm like, yeah, dude, I get it. I'm right here with you, man. And yeah, I like it. I'm not going to get into that again. I'm glad the lyrics are like this, though. At the beginning, I was like 3 songs straight about depression. I didn't say this, but I was thinking, I was like, oh, geez, are we going to get into another topic? But it works. This is the way to do it. Just to completely dive into this one idea and fully explore it. And there's going to be overlap there because it's one idea, but there's a constant need and execution of looking at different parts, different aspects of this larger whole, and it pays off right here. I really believe that. All right, I decided to do a little bit of background research, see what's going on here. I think I have a pretty strong understanding of what the album is doing itself, but I always like that little bit of context. And I'm sure I'm going to get a ton more in the comment section too. Harakiri for the Sky, though, is an Austrian band, 2-person artist. They are 2 members formerly of the black metal band Bifrost. So that's interesting. Did Bifrost split up and these 2 people went to do this? Or is this a side project where they still operate within both bands? Because this has been going strong. Like I said, there's a ton of albums. They're putting something out every 2 to 3 years. So definitely seems like they've got time to put focus on this. Now, the context on the album, the little bit that I got, it just says that it's an album about the loss of a dear friend and how the artist tries to cope with that loss. It doesn't really definitively say if this is fiction or not. I'm still want to lean towards this is real. Like I said, the delivery of, well, it's not the delivery. That doesn't really click with me. Oh, I forgot that we haven't had any clean vocals in like forever. Dude, that was my favorite part of track 3, was that? But the lyrics themselves and the nuance in them and the way that we fully explore this this emotion, this depression, despair, and the very human elements to it. It feels very real. If this is completely made up, creative process entirely, hats off to the lyricist. Man, this is fantastic art, honestly. All right. We got two more songs here, Dry the River and Bury Me. We may end up doing these back to back. It really depends on if Dry the River does anything that would cause me to want to talk about it. Let's dive in. Now this calm is interesting. There's still a little bit of darkness in it, but it doesn't feel uplifting, it feels resolute. It feels like accepting the outcome of something even though it wasn't what you wanted. But it's heavier than that. Usually acceptance is a bit more neutral. When we're talking about like acceptance for grief. This is still somber. Somber acceptance. I like that. Okay, that's a functional harmony. That works really well. So it might have just been that song then. Interesting, we ditched the car outside sound and it feels small. Two vocals? I think that's layered harshes. I just realized that that's cross-sticking on the snare too. And this feels like the same chord progression from the intro. It's played differently though. Ooh, some tension here. Oh, it's the same chord progression from the beginning. Again. I think it's interesting listening to how long the guitars will hold on to an idea versus the drums. This is like the third or fourth different drum pattern under this same riff. And admittedly, it's necessary, I think, for the drums to change things up when no one else will. I appreciate it anyways. Oh. That really felt like we were winding things down. So we did a fake out ending just to bring back that main motif. I feel like that's... Okay. 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 Okay, that worked. The fake out worked. I was really going to say this is just not great pacing. We had a really nice calming down of ideas, and it really felt like the song is pointing towards finality, and then it just continues for a brief moment and brings back an older idea. And I was like, well, maybe it's just the idea of like, again, going through the motions, right? That any sort of effort to create something well done is thematically inaccurate to the experience of the character. And so bringing it back for no reason other than just to bring it back because it feels safe, it feels comfortable, it's what we should do. I was like, yeah, maybe that's the angle they're going for. Right? Musically, it's not the great idea, but artistically, thematically, yeah, do it 100%. And then the gunshot abruptly as part of the music in rhythm, but also the final guitar riff comes in under under the gunshot sample. Yeah, yeah, that works. It feels abrupt. It kind of comes out of nowhere. I was confused anyways. I was trying to figure out what was going on. But assuming that based on all the other lyrics that he's decided to take his life here. And actually this was foreshadowed. Was it track 1 or 2 that said something like if the world doesn't take me then the bullet will or something like that? So yeah, that's actually been foreshadowed since the beginning of the album. But here's the thing, right? I feel like this is also accurate based entirely on pop culture's more, well, what I've been told is more accurate showcasing of suicidal tendencies in pop culture. I've never known anyone to commit suicide. I don't know how this works. So I could be way off base here, but I'm not talking about like some, 90s film that just uses it as some scapegoat to start a story, right? I'm talking about films that, writers are well known, writers knew somebody who was suicidal and committed suicide, and they're kind of basing it around some of this psychology, what psychologists have seen actions of suicidal people to be like. The song to me feels like it reaches a point where musically it lines up with the narrator's resolve. He just says, "This is it. It's done." And that's the fake out ending. They know what they're going to do. They've committed to it. This is now the task. You can't do it right now, though. So you have to put on a mask. You have to pretend that everything's okay and continue on until you have the opportunity to go through with it. Maybe you just have to get through the day. Maybe you have to get through the week. Who knows? You make things look fine. That's what bringing back the guitar motif is. And then when you finally have the opportunity to do it, it's just an abrupt end. It was planned for you, but not for everyone around you who thought things were fine. Yeah, I think this is the first time in the music that I have felt synergy between what I assume the narrative to be and what the music's doing. And it's so effective at putting me into the role of the observer, in a sense, right? This whole album, I've definitely been the audience of. I've been observing this character, but you don't really feel like you're a part of them. Just like when you go to the theaters, you don't feel like you're watching these people. You're of course watching a film. The editing is in there. There's time skips. You're not literally there watching these people, and that's sort of what I felt like with this album. It's a story, right? And I'm reading fiction, possibly. There's a distance. There's a wall here, a figurative wall that separates me from the people in the story. It's not like I'm seeing something happen on the sidewalk where I am literally in the physical vicinity of these events. This song pulled me into the story. I now feel like I am there. I have observed this. I am shocked at the ending here. I feel like probably what he felt like getting the phone call that his friend had taken his life. That moment of shock and disbelief. I don't think you can achieve that without bringing me into the story, without getting me engaged with it in some way. And I think they pulled that off in the final minute or two of this track. Masterfully done. I have my criticisms about this album, but everything leading up to this, very well done. Very well done. Just great execution. I can't take that one back. Uh, that pun was not intended. How do I recover from that? This music, it's kind of weird to go back from the ending, though, and talk about other parts of the song. Because, like, that's not just, like, the main point of the track. It's also the most important. It's the most impactful. Everything else feels small compared to it. But I do want to talk about the intro. And I did call it acceptance. Pained acceptance? Melancholic acceptance? I don't remember what I used to put an adjective on that. But it felt free in a way that most of the intros don't. As I'd mentioned, most of the intros do a pretty good job of painting the weight, the sorrow, the depression of all of it. They tend to be a bit heavier. They tend to focus on lower tones of a clean electric guitar, and heavier chord progressions and harmonies. Occasionally, we will have that brighter, lighter melodic work on top of it, but to me, that was more of the exception rather than the norm. It was the metal sections which felt too light for me thematically. So this stood out to me. It still had melancholy to it, sure. It was not a happy-go-lucky intro, but it was calm. Chillingly calm. It felt like acceptance, but again, like I mentioned, not like grief acceptance. More like acceptance of a decision, knowing what's going to happen and saying, I'm fine with this. It makes sense then that the song would ultimately end with the gunshot. It's already showcased here at the beginning of the song. A bit of hidden foreshadowing. I don't think anyone would be able to pick it up on the first time through, but retroactively, yeah, it makes perfect sense. Retrospectively. I don't know if I have a favorite track off of this album. Calling the Rain, probably. I feel like I have to go back and listen to that. In my memory, it was such a different song than all the other ones. But as far as artistic intention and follow through, Dry the River is probably the best track on the album. There's so much attention to detail in the intro, in the outro, even the journey up to it. Not much changed in there. It's a song like any other. They're not drawing any attention to this track. Not intently. And of course, it makes sense that the next song is called Bury Me. But before we get there, we need to look at the lyrics for Dry the River. I think this is the first track that's sort of confused me a little bit. There is a metaphor of a river and water, too. It starts off and says there's way too much water, but these rivers refuse to run dry. I don't understand what that means. All the world's wisdom lies buried beneath, but these rivers, they refuse to run dry. So if we could just get rid of the water, we could find wisdom, but we can't. There's too much of it. What is the water supposed to represent? Why specifically a river? This kind of gets answered in a second. In a couple of lines, we're going to talk about sinking, which makes sense. I mean, we're talking about depression as a whole. Sinking into depression is a very common phrase. Sinking is also what you do when you go underwater. So bringing water into it makes sense. He also brings up the rivers of Nile, which, of course, we're talking about death. There's also the river Styx. Water as a method of transportation from one realm of existence to the next, that also makes sense. The concept of using a river to start off, I get. I just don't understand what we're talking about with wisdom being beneath the river, and if only we could dry it out, we could dig for it. But what also comes up strange is later on, he talks about being a deluge, the greatest flood of all. I am the flood, he states, right before he repeats, dry the river, over and over and over. And I'm just more confused at this point. Are we drying the river? Are we filling it up? I don't know. He talks about being drawn towards death. He uses a lot of metaphors for that. But overall, I think the purpose here is that he's done entertaining the idea of suicide and he's landed on it. This is what he plans to do today. Death is all around him and he's fine with that. The last stanza says, "You can stop now. Leading me up to the garden paths, I'm awoken. I see all people behind their masks, all these pale corpses hurrying along a winding path, hurrying down these rivers to their end, which is death." Now, I find this interesting because it focuses on the destination, which I find is common in a lot of nihilism, especially death-focused nihilism, but also depression too. I think it's very easy to see the world this way, especially if you are, like this person, surrounded by negativity. When life is pain, suffering all the time, it's difficult to see the point of it. And if the end of this journey of pain and suffering is just death anyways, why don't we skip the pain and suffering and get to the good part? And so right here he says that he sees the truth of all things, that people, just corpses on a river going towards death. And that's why he chooses to commit suicide here. If this is the end result anyways and the journey's not worthwhile, what am I doing on the journey? How can I hasten this? How can I make my boat go down the river faster? All right. One more song to go. I mean, that's probably a triplet in 4. It's a fast 3, but is this the first song we've had that isn't in 4/4? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Well, it might still be in 4/4, but we have groupings of 3 exclusively, which is just something we haven't seen elsewhere. high fuzz lead into probably a full power guitar and drum return. That's a very stereotypical black metal idea right there. I do like that lick over there. I've noticed this too. Their transitions are very cool. They're short-lived though. We usually go right back into a more heavy metallic thing. Interesting bass kick too. Semi-galloped, but also kind of feels like a breakdown. Production on those toms is wild. And another interesting drum pattern. I wish I knew what to make of it. Now we're back to a more traditional one. I feel like on this channel I'm fairly honest about things. It's part of the charm, I suppose. Certainly driven away some fandoms, but I think for the most part it's better than being artificially receptive of everything. As much as I enjoyed the combination of sounds at the beginning of the album, I kind of grew numb to it. Dry the River was kind of 50-50 on, but Bury Me, I was honestly done. I wasn't finding anything of interest in what was being played. It just felt like more of the same. A couple of moments, sure, that I thought were interesting. Most of it drum patterns that kind of come out of nowhere and completely go against what they've been doing this entire time. I still don't know what to make of any of that. It's those little flickers of like a punkier aesthetic that shines through all across this album. Little twinkles of it at times. Never anything sticking around long enough for me to say it has any substance to the larger art, but it also happens way more often than I would expect. I don't know what to make of it though, other than maybe the drummer's just getting bored because they do try to change things up all the time. Maybe they're just tired of playing blast beats. Maybe they got tired of playing 16th notes. They're like, let me put a little syncopated thing in here. You know, I I don't know if it has anything to do more than that. But I was just really done with this. Um, and that's kind of resonant with the journey of the character here. I mean, this entire album has been how they don't want to feel anymore, and how life is just kind of bringing them down, and nothing's worthwhile, and everything's just sort of numb, anyways. So, I don't think that's their intention, though. It is an artistic parallel, but I think very few artists make music hoping that the audience grows bored of it by the end. Um, just a hunch that I have there. But yeah, this is not my scene, and like a lot of black metal, it goes against the grain as far as black metal is concerned, right? I had a lot of praise for the first couple of tracks, sans, track 2, which was more traditional black metal, but I liked what they were smashing together. Harmonic and melodic ideas that I'm more receptive to, and then putting that with a general black metal aesthetic and rhythmic rigidity. I thought it might have been the bridge that would help me get into more Blackened forms of music. But unfortunately, what they did carry over from black metal is an atmospheric standard and even a rhythmic standard. And those two things end up forcing a lot of these songs to feel very samey over time. Maybe as I listen to more of it, maybe if I listen to more black metal, I could hear more of the nuances in it in the same way that I hear nuance in prog rock, prog metal, post hardcore, emo, even metalcore. As generic as modern metalcore can be, I've heard a lot of it. I have a lot of familiarity with it. I can hear the nuances, the little things that differentiate songs and bands. Black metal to me is a code I still haven't cracked. A lot of it just ends up feeling the same to me, and I attribute a lot of that due to the repetition of rhythmic ideas and atmospheric ones. This album doesn't really change much from minute 1 to minute 75. There's a lot of nuance to that. There are changes on the smaller scale, but what I remember from each song, what I feel from each song, doesn't change. And if I was more receptive to that, if it was a genre of music that I enjoyed, it wouldn't really be a negative. I enjoy it. Why would I want them to change it? And so if you like this sound, I'm sure this album's fantastic for you. I was already growing tired of the sound halfway through, though. By the end of the song, I was done with it. And so, I don't really have much to add here on this final track. I was kind of expecting something different. He is dead now. Presumably, we would have had a song that would express something a bit more positive, hopefully. I mean, this is what he wanted, Or maybe it could have been subversive and it was a song that was even more gnarlier than anything else because the afterlife sucks or because of non existence or something like that. Instead, we just got a song that's more of the same. I think what kind of set me up for disappointment is the beginning of this track is quite a bit different from many of the other beginnings, and I was hoping they were going to run in that direction. And they chose to return to their pretty typical black metal sound. Well, typical for them. Their black metal sound to wrap up the rest of the song, and even then, it was probably me just being tired of the whole thing, but it felt overly long. Like there was a lot of fluff and just padding going on in it. But again, that could have been me just, you know, weary of this sound in general. I wish I could have been more receptive to it, though. It is an interesting combination of sounds, and it is something that could have been up my alley. Maybe there is somebody who makes Blackened post-hardcore out there in a way that I do enjoy it. I do find it interesting, though, and I think this is the closest I've gotten to enjoying something that still feels very traditional. We've checked out some progressive, avant-garde, experimental black metal that I have been more receptive to, but it deviates quite a bit from that norm. In fact, many of the Psy songs that I've come to enjoy are very loosely related to black metal in general. They're more exploratory songs. And the more traditional sounds that they do are the ones that I'm less receptive to. So, I mean, I think this was just fated from the start that I'd been interested in it at the beginning and bored of it by the end. There is a very large part of me, though, that wishes the music matched the lyrics a little bit better, and can't believe I'm saying this, but I think traditional black metal and the white noise fuzziness of that, the hazy wintertime sounds that I associate with black metal, very traditional black metal, and the heavy, gloom, depressive sound of it, the weight of it, kind of would have fit this better. I think I would have been less enthused about the music, but I wouldn't have had any complaints about thematic connectivity either. I hate to end an album on a downer, but I mean, it wasn't for me. And I had a tough time coming to terms with a lot of it too, even if, like I said, it was neat at the start, a cool little novelty that I wished kind of stuck to me a little more than it did. And this seems to be the suicide letter, which kind of explains, I suppose, the lack of a musical shift here, as I figured the story would continue on chronologically and that massive change would bring about an artistic shift. But since it is a suicide note, it is again about his time living. So it makes sense for musically the atmosphere not to have changed at all. The note is to someone specific. He says, I hope you'll find what you were always looking for. I hope you find the warmth and the protection I was unable to offer. For my own part, I just hope to find myself again, to unearth a long lost part of me. Bury me in these starlit cold waters, bury me in these two shallow graves, bury me once more in the dust of days, bury me among the river that once flooded this place. Now, the dust of days and the river that once flooded this place are brought up in other tracks. Starlit cold waters? That sounds familiar, but I can't think of a specific line. And the shallow graves, I don't think that's come up at all on this album. So I think it's interesting we have two allusions, at least, to other lyrics. It says this dire tide of disorder, once again going with this concept of water. It washed me away and got me stranded here so far from home. They're waiting for me here. But writing this song made me think only of you. So he does seem to have a regret here. He left somebody behind that he didn't want to. But he doesn't feel like he can continue going on with life, living the way he was, and he didn't see any fix to that either. Balancing out the pros and cons, even with the regret, he decided to take his life. Says I won't be long until I face the ferryman. I'm sure he'll be good to me, eventually setting me free. I'm sure I'll find peace now, finally eternal rest. For Carthage, please withdraw the obolos off my tongue and let me sleep. Here we're talking about the river Styx, which I brought up last song, and Karen, the ferryman across the river. And they put coins, the obolos, in their mouth when they died, in the mouth of the corpse, so that when they went into the afterlife, they would have the coin to pay Charon so that they could be taken to, why can't I think of what the afterlife's name was? I don't know why, that's annoying me a little bit. But he says, for Carthage, for taking me across this river, take the coin off my tongue and let me sleep. So basically he's saying I paid my price here. In one case, I never had doubts my passing will be a violent one. I'll be gone without a warning, and all I leave, this cryptic letter. This life deadened everything inside me, and all that I loved was carried away. I must have passed the point of no return, felt like 1,000 years ago, but I'm going home now. So he just talks about how long he's felt this way. That everything inside him is dead and numb, and all he feels is pain all the time. And his friend passing, he doesn't explicitly say this, but it's pushed him over the edge. It was the last thing tying him to this world. Like, really tying him. Like he said, he does regret leaving whoever this note is for, but the other person, his friend, I mean, that was it, because they made that bond, that whatever, years ago, that if any one of them were good to commit suicide, that they'd go together. And without his friend there, that one tether to this plane of existence was gone. He says, I felt dead inside from at least 1,000 years ago, and it's time to go home. I kind of wished then that the music would have gone more into a feeling of rest, of relaxation of some sort. I don't necessarily know if a song about suicide, or the Suicide Note song, if we want to put it that way, should have a positive feel to it. But I'm not too keen about the rising intensity at the end of this one either. I don't feel like much of this song reflects the feelings of this note. But I suppose that's par for the course. I haven't really felt that the lyrics and music work together at all in this album. It's no surprise I'm still with that same opinion here at the end. And that's going to wrap it up. These are my thoughts on Harakiri for the Skies 3, Trauma. Let me know what you thought on it. I was going to add some more stuff, but I've said my piece. I've spent 4 hours saying my piece. I'm going to hang it up here. What did you all think of this? If you think I'm totally wrong on this, please let me know, especially when it comes to these tracks that, well, in this case, an album that just really doesn't work for me. I love seeing another perspective on it, right? If I'm kind of 50-50, if it bounced off of me, but I understand it, like, I still like seeing more perspectives, but at least I have that mixed thing where I can see it from both perspectives. But this, it's neat at times, but there's so much of it that doesn't work for me sonically or artistically. I'd love to see somebody's opinion and perspective on things who really enjoy this, because I can't force that perspective like I can sometimes. So please, if you have thoughts, opinions, perspectives, anything, you want to tell me I'm wrong, straight up tell me I'm an idiot. At least back it up with some facts in your own opinion. Put that stuff down in the comment section. I'm really eager to read perspectives on this. Above the comments in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. Alright, that wraps it up for this one. I'll be back tomorrow morning, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. UTC. We're going to do a live stream, 2 hours, listening to some good music, having good discussions. Sometimes it's musical discussion, sometimes it's not. We've talked video games, we've talked language, we've talked all sorts of stuff, just wherever the conversation goes, you know? It's a good time. I highly suggest it if you can make it. Otherwise, I'll be back Monday, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, as usual. We're going to check out next week's theme, which is bass focused, I think. I got to double check that, but I'm pretty sure we're going to start a theme I call Drop the Bass, focusing on bass guitars. That's going to be awesome. I got to double check that that's what we're doing. I might be hyping myself up for nothing. Anyways, until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.